Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today I'm going to be looking back at the 2010 Bleacher Report list of the top 30 players in the NBA. And I just got this idea because ESPN recently came out with their top players under 25, and that gave me the idea to just kind of look back and see where the player rankings were all the way back in 2010. And this is actually a top 50 list, but I narrowed it down to the top 30 because if I didn't, it was going to be like a half an hour video. But we're just going to go ahead and jump into it. And the first guy at number 30 is none other than Steph Curry of the Golden State Warriors, who obviously had very recently been drafted. It says, after a slow start to the season, Steph impressed even his most faithful believers with a dominant stretch following the All-Star break. At worst, Curry was set to be a player who knew his limitations but could knock down threes and score in bursts. Now it appears he's on the verge of becoming a superstar, and obviously that became true. He ended up winning 2 MVPs, a couple of championships, but all the way back in 2010, he was ranked as the 30th best player in the league. Number 29 is Josh Smith of the Atlanta Hawks. Over the past few years, Smith has developed into a solid 15 to 16 point per game scorer, but last season was when he really began to take strides, talking about his 3-point percentage and things like that. So all the way back in 2010, Bleacher Report had Josh Smith ranked ahead of Steph Curry in terms of players in the NBA. Now, obviously, this is current at the time. This was before the 2010-11 season, so basically the end of the middle of 2010. And again, it's not about how good they were going to be in the future, it's how good they were right now, and Josh Smith was ranked number 29. Number 29. Number 28, though, my guy, Brook Lopez. I told you, this guy used to crush it for the Nets, 20-point per game scorer in the post, easy. After 2 years of being the team's only low post threat, Lopez should find it easier to operate from the block now that New Jersey, that's weird to hear, finally has a few 3-point threats to stretch the floor in Anthony Morrow and Troy Murphy. I remember when we traded for Troy Murphy. Says as New Jersey continues to add weapons, it'll only make Lopez more dangerous because team can't hone in on stopping him. And if they happen to acquire Carmelo Anthony, Lopez's value would skyrocket. This was at the time when the Nets were kind of up and coming. They were making some moves, and they were in talks to potentially acquire Carmelo Anthony or Dwight Howard. Obviously, that didn't end up happening. Howard went to the Lakers, and Melo went to the Knicks. But it's just interesting to read that and see that. Number 27 is Iggy at the time with the Philadelphia 76ers. It says Iggy's points and field goal percentage slipped last season, but his rebound, assists, threes, steals, blocks all improved from his totals in 2009. Regardless, we now know that Iguodala can be effective as the second or third option on a championship level team or potentially a finals MVP down the road. 26, Kevin Garnett of the Boston Celtics. He's in the twilight of his career, having averaged less than 19 points in the last 3 seasons for the first time in his career. He doesn't have to be effective. He doesn't have to score to be effective at this point in his career. Boston needs him to be the anchor of its defense. And this was the Celtics, I believe, just came off of losing to the Lakers in the 2010 finals. They made a really, really nice run in the playoffs. And then things obviously started to go downhill a bit from there. But having KG at 26 is not all that surprising. 25. Tyreke Evans. This was one that didn't last long. Last year's Rookie of the Year heads into 2011. Wow, he won Rookie of the Year, and the next year they had him as the 25th best player in the league. That's crazy. Heads into 2011 with even loftier expectations. Evans was only the 4th player to average 25 and 5 as a rookie, joining Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and Oscar Robertson. We all know that list. He creates mismatches with other guards, either overpowering smaller point guards or blowing by shooting guards. With a few strong low post presences, DeMarcus Cousins, Carl Landry, all the pieces are lined up for another big season from Evans. Obviously, the big rookie year that he had turned out to be not what the rest of his career was going to be like, and things kind of went downhill from there, and then he ended up in New Orleans and then Memphis, and I couldn't even tell you where, a lot of different places. Number 24 now, Carlos Boozer of the Chicago Bulls. This is so funny seeing some of these guys' names. And they're not wrong. These are all very good players in 2010. It's 9 years ago now, and it's just crazy to think about Josh Smith and Carlos Boozer and Tyreke Evans being ranked ahead of Steph. Boozer has proven himself as a double-digit threat night in and night out, averaging at least 16 and 10 per game since 2007. Now he switches point guards from Darren Williams to Derrick Rose, only has a player like Joakim Noah behind him. Is this the year that he signed? They don't have him in a Bulls uniform in this picture. Is this the year that he signed with the Bulls in free agency and left the Jazz? Anyway, makes sense. Al Jefferson at number 23. There's a lot of bigs in this top 30 or so far. At the time with the Utah Jazz, still Al Jefferson. Here's a list of the point guards that Al Jefferson has played with in his career. Gary Payton in 2004, not 1996. Marcus Banks, Delonte West, Rookie year Rajon Rondo, Sebastian Telfair, Marco Jaric, Randy Foye, and Johnny Flynn. That is not a great list. Says he provides Utah with legitimate back-to-the-basket presence, something that Carlos Boozer couldn't provide, throwing shade. And he's one of the few players that demand a double team when isolated on the block. Something tells me Jefferson might enjoy playing in Utah. Again, it's just weird. We've had, Josh Smith, Brook Lopez, Al Jefferson, and Carlos Boozer within the first 8 players in this top 30. It's just crazy how much the league has changed since 2010. 22, Manu Ginobili. Not the best picture they could have chosen for him there, but it says in Bill Simmons' most recent column, I guess at the time, Bill Simmons is still with ESPN in Grantland. He makes a great point about how Manu Ginobili has never really had a career year. Right now, it's probably 2008. We had 19.5 for blah, 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 blah. Can we expect one this year, though? He's 33 years old, and while he's only logged 670 regular season and playoff games in the NBA, his legs have a lot of wear in them because of international play. But simply put, an older version of Ginobili, or one at 85-90%, is better than 95% of the league. I personally didn't expect Ginobili to be this kind of high on the list, but I guess he is only 33 at this point, so it makes sense. Moving on now to Russell Westbrook at number 21, a very young-looking and relatively skinny Russell Westbrook in that picture. Says, quick, which of today's top 10 NBA point guards made the biggest leap between his rookie and sophomore season? Since we're on this slide, you might have guessed it was Russell Westbrook, who upped his per-game averages to 16, 8, and 5, and a steal a game while helping his team from 23 wins to 50 from year to year. It's crazy that Russ ever only averaged 5 rebounds per game. Obviously, his minutes were lower and he wasn't maybe trying so hard to get some of those rebounds and get those triple doubles, but those averages look like gross compared obviously to what he does now. But he was second year in the league, still trying to work through some struggles that he was having, but 21 already, and obviously well ahead once again of guys like Steph is impressive. Joe Johnson now of the Atlanta Hawks, hadn't been traded to Brooklyn yet, the 20th best player in the league in 2010. It says, let's start with the good. He's averaged 20 or more points for all 5 seasons he's been in Atlanta. He's a decent three-point shooter, blah, blah, blah. And now the bad. He turns 30 next summer and is heading into his 10th NBA season, which means he's probably maxed out his numbers and impact. And they just signed him to a $119 million contract, making him the highest paid free agent in a class that included Bron, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, Paul Pierce, and Dirk. And then they very happily dumped that contract on the Brooklyn Nets, where he stayed for a couple of years and dropped off pretty significantly. This turned out to be true, where he was turning 30 very soon, and he maxed out how good he was going to be. Not that he was bad with the Nets, just wasn't the same kind of player, and certainly wasn't worth the contract that he was being paid. Number 19, Paul Pierce, our second Celtic so far on the list. Once again, they had just come off of a finals run. It says Paul Pierce is 33 years old and has logged 985 career games, and his points per game have declined steadily since 2008, can be somewhat attributed to the additions of KG, Ray Allen, and Rajon Rondo. So why is he ranked as high as 19? Because he steps up his game when it matters most, either in the final minutes of a close game or in the postseason. And Paul Pierce is a guy that we don't really talk that much about, to be honest. We talk about a lot of other players in that era, guys like Kobe, obviously, but Paul Pierce has been great in his career throughout the playoffs, and someone that I feel like you could have really counted on as long as he wasn't getting hurt in the playoffs with a variety of injuries. He was someone that you could really count on in the postseason to step up his game, as this article says. Moving on, this is a really interesting one. Danny Granger at number 18. This is like before Paul George became Paul George. Danny Granger was a really outstanding player for the Pacers, someone that people thought was going to be an all-NBA guy for years to come. Really good size, super skilled, could pass, could defend, could shoot from the wing spot, and everything just kind of fell apart for him. But as you can see, he was thought of very highly, being ranked as the 18th best player in the league in 2010. It's because the Pacers have been a lottery team the last 3 years, it's tough to examine Granger's impact. On paper, he's been great, 22 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, steals, blocks per game since 2008. And he had had a share of unfavorable contracts, and in fairness, might not have realized what they were holding in Granger till he burst out in 2008. So they haven't really had an opportunity to try and build a team around him, which is why the Pacers' selection of Paul George in the 2010 draft was so puzzling, unless they planned on trading Granger. Obviously, George ended up being an all-NBA caliber player, and this year potentially an MVP caliber player, and Granger fell off, and he ended up not really being a part of the team at all once George broke out the way that he did. Next up, number 17, Amari Stoudemire. I don't know why they picked this picture for him at a Yankees game, but Amari Stoudemire, top 20 player back in 2010. I believe this is right around when he signed with the Knicks, and they were really, really good by Knicks standards. Amari Stoudemire specifically was really good. Like Raymond Felton was there still, and they were crushing it. They actually were playing really, really well once they signed Amari, which people didn't really understand the signing. They thought it was too much money for a guy with his injury history, but that Knicks team was actually really fun initially. It says Amari has blossomed into the upper echelon of power forwards in the last 6 years, averaging no worse than 20 and 8 during that time. But reuniting with Mike D'Antoni, who knows how and where Stoudemire is most effective, will make that transition smoother. Okay, so that's why they don't have him in a Knicks jersey. This is when he signed, so they put up a picture of him in a Yankees cap. Number 16, Steve Nash, with a picture of him and Steph at the same time. Says teams with Nash leading the helm at point guard have won 50 or more games 9 out of the last 10 years, and he's accumulated a winning percentage of 67.6. Says each of the past 2 seasons we've expected a drop off from Nash that hasn't come, and until it does, he has to rank among the top point guards and players in the league. And I'm pretty sure this is the last year that he played with the Suns before he got traded to the Lakers. I could be wrong, but I do remember that towards the back end of Steve Nash's time with the Suns, he elevated a couple of teams that weren't all that good to actually being pretty consistently tough to get out in the postseason, or just to get in the postseason in general. So it's just interesting again that Steve Nash is that high. I'm forgetting how long ago 2010 was. Number 15, our second Spur, I think. Manu is the other one. Tim Duncan. It says, my roommate Dave is a huge... I'm not going to read that. I don't care about your roommate. Blah, blah, blah. I'm not reading this. Okay. It says, he's only transcended the power forward position with some of the best low post moves we've seen since Kevin McHale. And Hakeem Olajuwon rises to the occasion when his team needs it, and he's won 4 NBA titles and been the catalyst for all 4 championship teams. I guess my only surprise at this point, and I'm going to see who the other players they have ranked higher are, is just I figured maybe Duncan would be higher on this list. Obviously he's getting up there in age, but we'll see who's in front of him. Number 14, a top 15 NBA player in 2010, Brandon Roy, who was so good before he got hurt, and it's really unfortunate the way his career ended up turning out. And really the only line to read here is the last one. It says, one of the most consistent players in the league, Roy will continue to fundamentally destroy defenders as long as his knees hold up. And unfortunately, that wasn't very long in terms of his knee holding up. Number 13, Chris Bosh of the Miami Heat. Statistics can often be aberrations in basketball. History has shown that even slightly above average players can put up all-star numbers on poor teams, and above average players can put up subpar numbers on great teams. He definitely has the skills to be the best power forward in the league. Whether or not he fulfills that hype in Miami remains to be seen, as just one of the seemingly thousands of intriguing plot lines around this team. And so this is when things were still kind of up in the air with this Heat team. They'd obviously just gotten there, LeBron, D-Wade, and Chris Bosh, and having him at 13 is probably about right, but he was hugely important to those teams in Miami. I don't really think people talk about that enough in terms of how important he was, especially once they moved him full-time to the 5 spot. Chris Bosh was a huge deal, and it's unfortunate the way his health issues have prevented him from continuing to play. Number 12 now, Derrick Rose. Says it's not often you see a player dramatically improve not only his game but his teammates in pressure-packed situations. It's even rarer to see when that player is only in his first or second year out of college and is barely old enough to legally drink. For the first time in his career, Rose has players around him that he can create plays for. John Salmons and Ben Gordon were 2 players that operated with the ball in their hands a majority of the time. Year 3 will be his breakout season, where he cements himself as a perennial all-star. Or, an MVP, that works too. This is the year that Derrick Rose won the MVP. This is the season, at least, that he won MVP in 2011. Number 11 now, our third Celtic, Rajon Rondo, who with the Celtics was incredible. Like, he obviously has had issues since with the Mavericks, and he's had some knee issues, and even with the Kings, he was seen as a little bit too much of a ball-dominant player, and with the Lakers, his impact is questionable. But with the Celtics, especially in the playoffs, he was incredible. It says there was turmoil with the Celtics last year, and part of that was a reluctancy from the veterans to turn the team over to Rondo. When they finally trusted him enough, though, he didn't disappoint. The scary part is that he's only 24. Doesn't it seem like he's been in the league for 7 or 8 years already? So he's someone that obviously fell down this list a little bit later on because of some of the issues that he had once he did go to the Mavericks and his knee issues and things like that. But at the time, this was 100% correct to have Rajon Rondo as almost a top 10 player in the league. Number 10, Pau Gasol, someone that's actually recently been in the news as he's a new member of the Milwaukee Bucks. And Pau Gasol, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I don't think people will talk about him enough in terms of how important he was to those Lakers championship teams. And in this case, obviously, they just came off of a championship in 2010 because Andrew Bynum was really good, but he seemed to always get hurt later in the year. And Pau Gasol carried those teams inside. Obviously, Kobe was doing great things for those teams. I don't want to take anything away from that. Lamar Odom as well. But Pau Gasol was hugely important to those teams. Gasol is the most impressive overall skill set of any power forward in the league, and he's the barometer of how successful the Lakers are, especially in the postseason. When he plays well, they win. When he doesn't, they lose. And like I said, with Andrew Bynum out and Kobe Bryant at less than 100%, he'll likely play a bigger role in the Laker offense throughout the regular season. Moving on now to number 9, we have Dirk Nowitzki, continuing our theme of having a good amount of big guys throughout this top 30. It says Dirk is still one of the NBA's premier scorers even at age 32. In 2008, it looked like he was finally slowing down when his points per game average dropped, but he bounced back to average 25 in 2009 and 25 once again in 2010. It says as long as he's been scoring at elite level, he is to be considered one of the league's best, and that's absolutely true. And little did we know at the time that Dirk was going to get his first championship in this 2010-11 season. They won the 2011 finals against the Miami Heat and got guys like Sean Marion and Jason Kidd and Jason Terry their first championship as well. That was one of my favorite teams ever just because so many guys got their first championship. They really deserved to have one, Dirk included. Number 8, Carmelo Anthony at the time, still with the Denver Nuggets. It says Melo and Dirk are fairly similar in their offensive repertoire. Nowitzki is taller and has a bit more range, but Anthony is quicker and more effective off the dribble. And I believe this season is either the one immediately before or the one immediately after when Melo took the Nuggets to the Western Conference Finals and lost to the Lakers in a series that they probably should have won. It says if Kevin Durant is the most natural scorer, Melo is a close second. So obviously KD is going to be coming up here on this list. It says he has the strength and quickness to be a beast on the defensive end as well, but he hasn't displayed the tenacity or mental will to dominate on that end, and that has yet to change throughout his career. Number 7, Deron Williams, still with the Utah Jazz. D-Will, he had such a weird career because obviously it was him and Chris Paul that got drafted within the top 5 and back-to-back picks in their draft class. Chris Paul took off immediately. Deron Williams took a little bit more time, but then was awesome for the Jazz. Had a weird situation with Jerry Sloan, didn't want to be in Utah anymore. They traded him, was good for the Nets initially, fell apart in terms of injuries, and then bounced around the league as a role player to a couple of different teams. I love watching Deron Williams play. I love seeing him break down in defense with his extraordinary ball handling. Blah, 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 blah. I love. The Jazz offense is based around execution and each player fulfilling their role and trying not to supersede the system. But it only goes as far as the production it gets from their point guard. And when you have point guards like John Stockton and Deron Williams, you're bound to be successful. So at the time, like I said, it wasn't crazy to be putting John Stockton and Deron Williams in the same sentence. He was awesome for the Jazz. Number 6, Dwight Howard, still with the Orlando Magic. Again, all the way back in 2010, the NBA is much different. It says, by far the most dominant center in the league, Howard has been a force at both ends of the floor for most of his career. It says he's the one player who can single-handedly destroy the Heat, and for entertainment's sake, let's hope he develops that killer instinct and focuses on becoming the defining center of the decade. And at this point, he had already made his finals run with the Magic, and then pretty soon after this, he ended up being traded. But again, he was incredible with the Magic. He was in a really good situation, though, as well, where they surrounded him with a ton of shooters and were kind of ahead of their time in that aspect, just having Dwight roll to the rim all the time. Those were really cool teams. Number 5 now, top 5 players in the league in 2010. The guy that I talked about a little bit earlier, Chris Paul at the time, still with New Orleans. Talked about some of the playoff struggles that they had, some of the other point guards who were in the league, but there was no question, and really over the next 5 years since this article was written, there was no question about Chris Paul being one of the best point guards in the league. Obviously, Steph came along and kind of stole that mantle from him, but he's been so good and has had an outstanding career. Number 4 now, Dwayne Wade, our second player for the Miami Heat, says somewhere between winning the 2006 title and 2008 Olympics, Wade got lost in the shuffle when determining the NBA's best. It's fascinating to watch the Heat in the final moments of close games. Is the offense going to run through LeBron or Wade? That was the question leading up to this 2010 Heat team. Who was going to figure it out in crunch time? Who was going to be the guy? And they really didn't figure it out until the following season when Wade kind of let Bron take over a little bit more in that way. Number 3 now, Kevin Durant of the Oklahoma City Thunder. So obviously LeBron is going to be somewhere ahead of KD on this, and I'm interested to see who the other guy is. As I wanted to put him at number 1, he's likable, dynamic, marketable, and has more potential than anyone else in the top 10. But you can't place Durant above the other top 2 players in this list based on what you'd expect him to accomplish. The Thunder are poised to be one of the West top teams and a candidate to steal the number 1 seed from the Lakers. Durant will continue to dominate as a trendy pick to repeat as scoring champion and win the MVP. Obviously, Derrick Rose ended up winning the MVP. The 2 guys in front of him are pretty obvious. But yeah, I mean, at the time, having KD as the 3rd best player in the league, not unforeseen. And obviously, Kobe, the next guy on the list, excuse me, I lied. Kobe's the 1st player on the list. LeBron's 2. Kobe just came off of an NBA championship, so having him at 1 makes sense. LeBron says the lack of championship may hamper where we place LeBron historically at this point in his career, but right now he still has a slight edge over Durant. But if James wants to enhance his legacy, he needs to win now. He didn't quit in the Cavs in Game 5 against Boston, but no one can deny that he shied away from the moment. This is obviously the season where the Heat didn't start all that well, and they ended up losing to the Mavs in the finals, and then LeBron won a championship the year after. Number one, coming off of another championship in 2010, is Kobe Bryant. It says, I flip-flop dozens of times trying to determine the order of 1 through 3, but the picture on the left of the screen is the prominent reason why Kobe gets the nod. I'm assuming when it says left of the screen, it means above him winning the championship. No player in today's NBA is wired like Michael Jordan, but Kobe is the closest. Another title cements his place as, at worst, one of the 5 greatest players in history. He could arguably be the greatest Laker of all time, and you could make a legitimate case in the MJ-Kobe argument. He knows this, he relishes it, and until James Durant or Wade beats him in the postseason, he deserves this spot. And it's crazy reading that sentence, how much things have changed in people's minds in terms of having Kobe as one of the 5 greatest players in history. I'm not saying that that's a bad take. I'm just saying that I don't think that that's something that people say a lot anymore. And we have guys obviously like Bron, MJ, Kareem, maybe even Bill Russell, guys like that. And I'd say definitely Kobe is in most people's top 10, if not everybody's top 10, but top 5 is, again, it's not my opinion. I'm just saying it's crazy to think about how much really that's changed. This is him coming off the championship, obviously, compared to now. But like I said, that is the top 30 players according to Bleacher Report in the 2010-11 NBA season. You guys have really been enjoying these looking back kind of videos. I've really been enjoying making them. So please leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Let me know if there are any other looking back kind of videos that you guys would like to see, and I would absolutely love to make them. But once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.